I used to believe that the worst news a man could receive arrived with a phone call in the middle of the night. I was wrong. Sometimes it arrived in the small hand of a 7-year-old boy carrying a sealed envelope that already knew your name. The first thing I noticed wasn't the child. It was the silence. My headquarters never stayed quiet. Security radios crackled. Elevators hummed. Expensive shoes echoed across polished marble. But at exactly 9:14 on a gray Tuesday morning, every sound seemed to disappear the moment the front doors opened. A little boy stepped inside wearing a faded blue hoodie that looked one size too big, worn sneakers with untied laces, and a backpack that had clearly seen better days. His blonde hair needed a haircut. His cheeks were pink from the October cold. He looked completely ordinary, the kind of kid you'd expect to see waiting for a school bus instead of walking into the headquarters of the most feared businessman in Manhattan. My security team reacted instantly, though with restraint. 2 men approached him carefully, kneeling so they wouldn't appear intimidating. One of them smiled. "Hey, buddy. Are you lost?" The boy shook his head. "I'm here for Adrian Romano." Hearing my full name from someone so young made several heads turn. "Do you know Mr. Romano?" another guard asked gently. The child nodded once. "Mommy said only he can have this." He reached into his backpack with both hands and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly worn as if it had been opened and closed many times before. My initials were written across the front in neat handwriting. A.R. The moment I saw those letters, something tightened inside my chest. I had seen that handwriting before. Years ago. Somewhere my memory refused to visit. "Bring him upstairs," I said through the office intercom before anyone could ask another question. Minutes later, the boy stood in my office, looking around with the innocent curiosity only children possess. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Shelves of rare books lined one wall. The espresso on my desk had already gone cold. None of it seemed to impress him. His attention stayed on the envelope in his small hands. "Mommy said not to let anybody else touch it," he whispered. "Only you." I walked around my desk slowly, lowering myself until we were almost eye level. "What's your name?" "Ethan Bennett." The last name meant nothing. Not immediately. "And where's your mother now?" His smile disappeared. He looked down at the floor, rubbing the corner of the envelope with his thumb. "She said if she ever disappeared, I had to wait until my birthday." He paused, taking a careful breath. "Yesterday was my birthday." Every instinct I'd developed over 15 years told me something was terribly wrong. I accepted the envelope carefully. The paper felt older than it should have, soft from age, as though it had been hidden somewhere safe for a very long time. The seal had never been broken. On the back was a single sentence written in the same elegant handwriting. "If Ethan found you, it means I couldn't come back." My pulse slowed instead of racing. The room seemed colder. I broke the seal with my thumb. Inside rested one folded letter and a faded photograph. The photographs slipped onto my desk first. A young woman stood beside a lake, laughing into the summer wind, her hand resting gently against her stomach. Claire Bennett. 8 years vanished in a single heartbeat. Then my eyes found the first line of her letter. "Adrian, if you're reading this, I already lost." My hands refused to unfold the second page. They had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without trembling. They had signed contracts that changed the future of entire companies. Yet one letter from a woman I had buried in my memory made my fingers feel like they belonged to someone else. Ethan sat quietly across from me, swinging his feet beneath the oversized leather chair as though this office were any ordinary place. He did not interrupt. He simply watched me with patient blue eyes that carried a familiarity I could not explain. I forced myself to read. "Adrian, if you are holding this letter, then I made the only choice I believed would keep him alive. I am sorry for disappearing without giving you the truth. I know you will think I betrayed you." I let out a slow breath that seemed to echo through the room. 8 years earlier, betrayal was exactly what I had believed. Claire Bennett had vanished 2 days before we were supposed to meet. She had left behind an empty apartment, a disconnected phone number, and questions that no amount of money could answer. My investigators searched for months. Every lead dissolved into nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself she had chosen a different life. It had been easier than accepting there might be another reason. I continued reading. You once told me that every lie grows heavier with time. You were right. I have carried this one every single day. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair. Is Mommy in trouble? He asked softly. I lowered the letter before answering. I do not know yet. It was the first honest sentence I had spoken all morning. He nodded as though he had expected that answer. She said you would not lie to me. The words landed harder than I expected. Claire remembered that conversation too. Years ago, she had laughed when I admitted I hated unnecessary lies. She had called honesty my most surprising quality. I had almost forgotten the sound of her laugh until this moment. My eyes returned to the page. There are people who never stop looking for something they believe belongs to them. If they discover Ethan exists, they will never stop searching. That is why he has never known your name. That is why I taught him only one thing. Find Adrian Romano if I cannot come home. My heartbeat slowed into an uneasy rhythm. Claire had never been careless with words. Every sentence carried purpose. She was not asking for sympathy. She was leaving instructions. I looked toward Ethan again. Who brought you here today? A nice lady from my school. Does she know where your mother is? He shook his head. Mommy did not come to pick me up yesterday. My teacher cried a little. Then she found the envelope in my backpack. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny silver key attached to a blue ribbon. She also said you would know what this opens. I stared at the key resting in his small palm. It looked ordinary except for one tiny engraving near the base. A lighthouse. My breath caught. There was only one place Claire and I had ever visited with a lighthouse. A quiet town on the coast of Maine where she once told me she finally felt safe enough to sleep through the night. I had not thought about that trip in years. Claire had. She had remembered every detail. And somehow she had known that one day I would have to remember it too. The silver key rested in my palm long after Ethan had closed his small hand again, as if the cold metal had left behind a memory instead of a temperature. I walked back to the window overlooking Midtown Manhattan, but I was no longer seeing glass towers or morning traffic. I was standing on a weathered wooden pier in coastal Maine, 8 summers earlier, listening to Claire laugh as the ocean breeze tangled her golden hair. She had pointed toward the old lighthouse rising above the cliffs and smiled. If I could disappear anywhere, she had said, I think I would choose a place where the light always finds its way home. At the time, I thought she was talking about peace. Now I wondered if she had been planning for a future she hoped would never arrive. I unfolded the next page of her letter. The handwriting remained steady, every word carefully spaced as though she had taken hours to write it. Adrian, you will probably go to the lighthouse first. I knew you would remember. But do not expect to find me there. What you will find is the beginning of the truth. I closed my eyes for one brief moment. She still knew me better than anyone else ever had. 8 years had changed the city, my business, and the man I had become, but somehow Claire had predicted my very first decision. Mr. Romano? Ethan's quiet voice pulled me back. Did Mommy write something sad? I looked at him carefully. Children often asked questions they were not ready to hear answered. She wrote that she trusted me, I said. His shoulders relaxed just enough for me to notice. She said you would? Before I could respond, my assistant Sophia knocked softly on the office door. She stepped inside carrying a tablet, stopping immediately when she noticed the child. Her expression shifted from professional focus to gentle concern. I cancelled your afternoon meetings, she said. I thought you might want some privacy. I nodded. Thank you. I need every record connected to Claire Bennett from the past 10 years. Hospital visits, property records, driver's license renewals, school registrations, everything that exists. Sophia hesitated. We already searched years ago. Search again. My voice remained calm, but something inside it made even me sound unfamiliar. This time search for Ethan Bennett as well. She nodded once and quietly left the room. Ethan looked toward the bookshelf lining one wall. Mommy liked books. He walked over without asking permission and ran his fingers across the leather bindings. She always said stories help people wait. Wait for what? I asked. He smiled sadly, far too sadly for a 7-year-old. Good things. The answer settled over the room like dust floating through afternoon sunlight. Claire had raised him with hope instead of fear. Whatever burden she had carried, she had refused to pass it to her son. I looked back at the letter. There was another folded sheet hidden beneath the first. This one contained no sentences. Only 3 names written in blue ink. Daniel Mercer. Olivia Hayes. Samuel Brooks. Beneath them was one date. October 17th. Tomorrow. My pulse quickened for the first time since Ethan had arrived. These were not random names. Daniel Mercer had once worked as an architect in Portland before disappearing from public records years ago. Olivia Hayes sounded painfully familiar, though I could not yet place why. Samuel Brooks stirred something even deeper, a memory that refused to fully surface. Claire had not left me answers. She had left a trail. And somehow she believed that after 8 years, I was still the only person willing to follow it. I have learned that memories rarely return in order. They arrive like scattered puzzle pieces, each one meaningless until the next falls into place. By noon the rain had begun, turning the windows into shifting sheets of gray. Ethan sat on the rug beside the fireplace in my office, quietly building a city from wooden blocks, one careful piece at a time. Every few minutes he glanced toward me, not because he was afraid, but because children always checked to make sure the adults they trusted were still there. I stayed at my desk with Claire's letter open beside me, waiting for answers that refused to come quickly enough. The soft knock on my office door broke the silence. Sophia entered carrying 2 thick folders and a digital tablet. She looked more puzzled than concerned. "This does not make sense," she said, placing everything in front of me. "I searched every federal, state, and public database available." I looked up. And? Claire Bennett practically disappeared 8 years ago. No driver's license renewal. No employment history. No property records. No tax filings. Nothing. She paused before sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. But Ethan exists. School enrollment. Pediatric checkups. Library card. Vaccination records. Everything a normal child should have. My eyes narrowed. Who registered him? Sophia slowly shook her head. Every form lists the same signature. Claire Bennett. But there is never a home address. Only post office boxes that were closed years ago. I leaned back in my chair. Claire had not vanished by accident. She had erased herself while making certain Ethan could still live like any other little boy. It was careful. Deliberate. Almost impossible. Ethan looked up from his blocks. "Mommy always said moving was like changing seasons. Did you move a lot?" I asked gently. He nodded. Sometimes after Christmas. Sometimes before school started. She said every place was just another adventure. My chest tightened. To him, it had been an adventure. To Claire, it had been survival. Sophia opened the second folder. I also checked the 3 names from the letter. She pointed to the first page. Daniel Mercer died 5 years ago from natural causes in a retirement community outside Portland. One mystery had already reached a dead end. Olivia Hayes teaches 1st grade at an elementary school in Concord, New Hampshire. Clean record. Volunteers at a food pantry every Saturday. She hesitated before continuing. Samuel Brooks is different. I looked up immediately. How? There are 6 people with that name. 5 are ordinary. 1 intentionally. Changed his identity 7 years ago through a legal protection program. Most of the file is sealed. The room grew very still. Claire had somehow connected herself to people whose lives had scattered in completely different directions. One was gone. One lived openly. One had disappeared behind locked records. None of it felt random. My phone vibrated against the desk. An unfamiliar number. I answered without speaking. The voice on the other end belonged to an older woman. Calm. Careful. Is Ethan with you? She asked. I glanced toward the little boy, who had just finished building a tiny lighthouse from the wooden blocks. Who is this? My name is Olivia Hayes. My grip tightened around the phone. You found the letter. It was not a question. Yes. A long silence followed before she spoke again. Then you are already too late to stop what Claire started. But if you want any chance of finding her, you need to come alone. My heartbeat remained steady, yet every instinct sharpened at once. Where? The lighthouse in Maine. She paused just long enough for the weight of her next words to settle. There is something waiting for you inside that Claire hid 8 years ago, and if another day passes without you finding it, everything she sacrificed will have been for nothing. The drive to Maine began before sunrise, with the city still wrapped in darkness and the streets almost empty. Rain clung to the windshield in tiny silver beads while the skylines slowly disappeared behind me. Ethan slept peacefully in the back seat beneath a navy blue blanket that one of my assistants had quietly packed before we left. Every few minutes he shifted slightly, hugging the worn backpack that had carried Claire's letter across so many miles. I wondered how many mornings had begun exactly like this for them, always moving, always searching for another place where nobody knew their names. The thought stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. 3 hours into the trip, Ethan finally opened his eyes. He stared out at the endless forest sliding past the highway before looking at me through the rearview mirror. Mommy always liked road trips, he said with a sleepy smile. She said every road tells a different story. I smiled faintly. She was right. He tilted his head. Did you go on trips with her too? I hesitated just long enough for the silence to answer before I did. Once. He seemed satisfied with that. Children accepted simple truths better than complicated explanations. We stopped at a small diner outside Portsmouth just after noon. Nothing about the place stood out except the smell of fresh coffee and warm apple pie. The waitress greeted Ethan by complimenting his lighthouse drawing that he had tucked beneath his arm. He proudly showed it to her before returning to our booth. Watching him laugh over a stack of pancakes felt strangely unfamiliar. My world had always been built around schedules, negotiations, and decisions measured in dollars. Claire had somehow raised a little boy who still noticed cloud shapes and counted red pickup trucks along the highway. She had protected something inside him that money could never buy. As we prepared to leave, my phone vibrated again. Olivia Hayes. I answered immediately. You are closer, she said without greeting me. How do you know where I am? She ignored the question. When you reach the lighthouse, do not look upstairs first. I frowned. Why? Because Claire knew you would. She always said you rush toward answers when you should begin with memories. Before I could ask anything else, the call ended. Ethan looked at me curiously. Was that Aunt Olivia? The words caught my attention. You know her? He nodded. She read books to me sometimes. Mommy trusted her. Another piece settled into place. Olivia had not simply known Claire. She had been part of Ethan's life. The final stretch of highway curved along the rocky coastline, where waves crashed gently against dark cliffs beneath a pale afternoon sky. The lighthouse appeared exactly as I remembered it, standing alone above the Atlantic Ocean with white paint faded by years of salt and wind. Time had weathered the building, but not the feeling it carried. Ethan leaned forward between the seats, his eyes growing wide. Mommy brought me here once, he whispered. She cried while looking at the water. I parked beside the gravel path leading toward the entrance. The air smelled of pine trees and sea salt, exactly as it had 8 years earlier. Every step toward the lighthouse felt like walking deeper into a life I thought had ended long ago. When we reached the old wooden door, Ethan quietly took the silver key from his pocket and placed it in my hand. Mommy said it only works if you believe she is still waiting. I looked at the weathered lock beneath the brass handle. It matched the key perfectly. But before I could turn it, I noticed something carved into the wooden frame that had definitely not been there 8 years ago. It was only 4 words, written so carefully they almost looked like part of the wood itself. Do not come alone. For a long moment I simply stared at the words carved into the weathered wood. Do not come alone. The ocean wind carried the distant cry of gulls across the cliffs, but everything else felt unnaturally still. 8 years ago Claire had stood beside this very door, smiling as she challenged me to climb to the top before sunset. Back then I believed every warning could be overcome by determination. Now I understood that some warnings were acts of love. Ethan stepped closer until his small hand found mine. "Mommy touched those letters," he whispered. "She made me promise never to scratch them away." I looked down at him. "She told you that?" He nodded. "She said one day you would need them." I slid the silver key into the lock. It turned smoothly with a soft click that sounded almost welcoming. The heavy wooden door opened inward, releasing the scent of old cedar, salt air, and dust that had rested undisturbed for years. Sunlight streamed through narrow windows, painting long golden lines across the worn floorboards. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved, as though someone had been protecting this place instead of forgetting it. Remembering Olivia's words, I resisted the instinct to climb the spiral staircase. Instead, I walked slowly across the first floor. Every object seemed frozen in time. A small wooden table. A faded rocking chair. A brass lantern resting beside the fireplace. Ethan wandered toward a shelf filled with children's books, his face brightening. "These were here before," he said. "Mommy read this one." He carefully pulled out a copy of Charlotte's Web. As he lifted the book, something thin slipped from between the pages and floated gently onto the floor. It was a folded drawing made with colored pencils. Ethan immediately recognized it. "I drew that." I picked it up carefully. It showed the lighthouse beneath a bright blue sky. 3 stick figures stood outside holding hands. One was labeled Mommy. One was labeled Ethan. The third figure had only one word written above it. Adrian. I felt my throat tighten. "Did your mother ask you to draw this?" He smiled. "She said families should always leave pictures in happy places." Family. Claire had written my name beside theirs years before I ever knew Ethan existed. I unfolded the drawing completely. On the back, written in Claire's unmistakable handwriting, was another message. "If you found this, then you finally listened instead of rushing ahead. Thank you." There was an arrow pointing toward the stone fireplace. I walked closer and noticed one brick looked newer than the others. Kneeling down, I pressed against it. The brick shifted inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow compartment hidden inside the chimney. My pulse quickened as I reached into the opening. Instead of documents or money, my fingers found a small wooden box wrapped in blue cloth. The same shade of blue as the ribbon attached to Ethan's key. I carefully lifted it out and set it on the table. The lid was secured with a tiny brass clasp. Before opening it, I noticed another envelope taped beneath the box. This one carried only 4 handwritten words. "Read this before opening. Claire never wasted words." I unfolded the note slowly. "Adrian, if Ethan is standing beside you, then I succeeded. He still smiles. He still trusts people. Please protect that before you protect anything else." Tears blurred my vision for the first time in years. Across the room, Ethan looked out the window toward the endless Atlantic, completely unaware of the weight those simple sentences carried. Then he quietly pointed toward the distant shoreline. "Someone is coming," he whispered. I turned toward the window and saw a single gray SUV climbing the narrow coastal road, moving steadily toward the lighthouse exactly as the afternoon sun disappeared behind gathering clouds. The gray SUV rolled to a slow stop beside the lighthouse, its engine falling silent beneath the steady rhythm of crashing waves. I instinctively stepped closer to Ethan, placing myself between him and the front door without making him feel afraid. He looked up at me with complete trust, the kind that could never be demanded and could only be earned. "Is it Aunt Olivia?" he asked hopefully. I looked through the old glass window as the driver's door opened. An older woman with silver hair stepped onto the gravel path, wrapping a navy coat tightly around herself against the cold ocean wind. She carried no luggage. No umbrella. Only a weathered leather satchel pressed carefully against her side. When she reached the porch, she stopped instead of knocking. "Adrian," she called gently through the door. "You finally came." I unlocked the door and opened it halfway. She smiled sadly the moment she saw Ethan. "Hello, sweetheart." Ethan ran forward without hesitation and hugged her around the waist. "I miss you," he whispered. Olivia Hayes closed her eyes for a brief second before hugging him back. "I miss you too." Watching them together answered more questions than words ever could. Claire had never raised Ethan completely alone. Olivia had been quietly protecting both of them. Once Ethan wandered toward the bookshelf again, Olivia turned to me. "Did you read everything Claire left?" I held up the letter. "Not all of it." She nodded. "Good. Some truths should arrive in the right order." I looked at the wooden box still resting unopened on the table. She wanted me to wait. She always did understand patience better than either of us. Olivia walked toward the fireplace and gently rested her hand on its old stone mantel. 8 years ago Claire came here because she knew nobody would think to search a place filled with happy memories. She wanted Ethan's first years to be filled with ordinary things. Birthdays. School plays. Pancakes on Saturday mornings. She fought for normal moments, while everyone else only thought about extraordinary problems. I felt the weight of those words settle heavily inside me. I had spent years believing Claire disappeared because she no longer wanted me in her life. The truth sounded far more painful. Why did she never tell me? Olivia looked directly into my eyes. Because she believed loving someone sometimes meant leaving before they became another target. Silence filled the room again. Outside, the lighthouse beacon slowly rotated through the gathering evening mist, sending its steady light across the ocean. Olivia reached into her satchel and removed a small photo album tied with a pale blue ribbon. She handed it to me without speaking. The first page held photographs of Ethan as a newborn, wrapped in a white blanket, sleeping peacefully in Claire's arms. The second showed his first birthday. The third, his first day of kindergarten. Every page contained moments I had never known existed. Then I reached the final photograph. Claire stood beside Ethan outside this very lighthouse only 3 months earlier. She looked thinner than I remembered, but her smile remained unmistakably hers. Written beneath the picture in blue ink were 6 simple words. "We never stopped waiting for you." My chest tightened so suddenly I could barely breathe. Olivia quietly spoke before I could ask another question. "There is one thing Claire never wrote because she wanted you to hear it from someone who was there." I slowly looked up. Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Adrian, Ethan is not your son." My thoughts froze for a heartbeat before she continued. "But years ago, after you saved Claire's life, she made you his legal guardian without ever telling you. If anything happened to her, she trusted only one person to finish raising the little boy she loved more than herself. She trusted you. Some promises change your future the moment you learn they already exist." I looked at the photograph again, searching Claire's smile for answers she could no longer explain herself. She had trusted me with the most important part of her life without ever asking for permission. Somehow she had believed I would say yes, even after all the years of silence between us. I carefully closed the photo album and finally reached for the small wooden box resting on the table. The brass clasp opened with almost no effort, as though it had been waiting patiently for this exact afternoon. Inside lay a simple leather journal, a sealed manila envelope, and a delicate silver necklace with a tiny lighthouse charm hanging from its chain. Olivia smiled faintly when she saw it. She wore that every day until the last time I saw her. I lifted the necklace gently. The metal was cool against my fingertips. Tucked beneath it was a folded note written on a small cream-colored card. "Adrian, if you are holding this, then you chose compassion before curiosity. That means I was right about you." I swallowed hard before opening the journal. Claire had dated each entry with remarkable care. The first pages described ordinary moments. Ethan learning to ride a bicycle without training wheels. His excitement over losing his first tooth. His favorite breakfast changing from oatmeal to blueberry pancakes. Every page reminded me that while I had been building a larger empire, Claire had been building a beautiful childhood one quiet morning at a time. Then the entries gradually changed. She wrote about growing tired more often than usual. She mentioned frequent visits to specialists without explaining why. She never complained. Instead, she filled each page with hopes for Ethan's future. I want him to become someone kind. I want him to laugh easily. I want him to know that being gentle is never weakness. My vision blurred again. There was not a single sentence asking anyone to feel sorry for her. Every page was about protecting someone else. At the very back of the journal, an envelope had been tucked inside the cover. Across the front, Claire had written only one instruction. Open this only after you understand what really matters. I carefully unfolded the letter inside. Adrian, there is something I never wanted Ethan to witness. Fear. Not mine. Yours. That is why I stayed away. You would have spent every resource you had trying to fix what could not be controlled. I needed you to remain the man who solved impossible problems because one day Ethan would need that version of you more than I ever could. I slowly lowered the page, unable to speak. Olivia rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. She protected both of you in different ways. Before I could answer, Ethan wandered over carrying one of the children's books. Can we stay here a little longer? He asked. It feels like Mommy is still smiling here. I looked around the lighthouse once more. The afternoon light poured through the windows, warming the old wooden floor where dust floated like tiny stars. Nothing about this place felt empty anymore. It felt filled with every memory Claire had carefully preserved for the day we would finally arrive together. Then Olivia reached into the leather satchel one last time and removed a white envelope that looked newer than everything else. This arrived at my house 3 days ago, she said quietly. There was no return address. My name was written across the front in handwriting I did not recognize. I opened it carefully and found a single sheet of paper with one sentence printed in black ink. She is still alive, but not for much longer unless you follow the final instructions. Beneath the message was a map marked with one location less than 20 miles from the lighthouse, and for the first time since Ethan walked into my office, hope returned stronger than grief. Hope has a strange way of making every mile feel shorter. 20 minutes after leaving the lighthouse, we followed the narrow coastal road marked on the anonymous map until the pavement gave way to a gravel driveway lined with towering pine trees. At the end stood a modest white cottage overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. There were flower boxes beneath the windows, a weathered porch swing gently moving in the evening breeze, and a small blue bicycle leaning against the front steps. Nothing about the place suggested fear. It looked like the kind of home Claire would have chosen if all she ever wanted was peace. I stepped out of the car slowly while Olivia stayed beside Ethan, distracting him by pointing toward the lighthouse that was barely visible in the distance. My heart felt heavier with every step toward the front door. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, softer this time. A few seconds later the door opened just enough for an elderly man with kind gray eyes to look outside. He studied my face for a long moment before quietly asking, "Are you Adrian Romano?" I nodded. His shoulders relaxed as though he had been carrying a burden for years. "She always believed you would come." He stepped aside without another word. The cottage smelled of fresh bread, lavender, and old books. Sunlight poured through lace curtains onto polished wooden floors. Framed photographs filled the walls. Claire smiling beside Ethan. Ethan feeding ducks at a pond. Ethan blowing out birthday candles. A life had continued here while I spent years believing it had vanished forever. "Where is she?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. The old man pointed toward the back room. "She is resting." Every instinct urged me to run, yet I found myself walking more slowly than ever before. I stopped outside the half-open bedroom door, suddenly afraid that hope itself could disappear if I moved too quickly. Then I saw her. Claire sat beside an open window wrapped in a light cream sweater, a blanket resting across her knees as the ocean breeze gently lifted strands of her golden hair. She looked thinner than I remembered, and time had softened the edges of her face, but her eyes were exactly the same. Bright. Calm. Full of quiet strength. She looked up from the book in her hands and smiled as though only a single afternoon had passed instead of 8 years. You finally listened, she said softly. I laughed before I realized tears were running down my face. You left enough clues to fill a library. She smiled wider. I knew you would solve them eventually. For a long moment neither of us spoke. There was no need. Some reunions are too important for hurried words. Then footsteps raced down the hallway. Ethan appeared in the doorway, stopping completely still when he saw his mother. His eyes grew impossibly wide. Mommy? Claire opened her arms. Come here, sweetheart. He ran into her embrace, holding on so tightly that even the evening sunlight seemed to pause around them. Olivia quietly closed the bedroom door behind me, giving us the gift of privacy. I stood there watching the family Claire had protected with every difficult choice she had made, realizing that love is sometimes measured not by the years people spend together but by the sacrifices they make while apart. Claire looked at me over Ethan's shoulder. I'm sorry I made you wait. I gently shook my head. You did not make me wait. I smiled through grateful tears. You gave me someone worth finding. Weeks later, after lawyers completed the documents Claire had prepared years before and every unanswered question finally found its place, we returned to the lighthouse one last time. Ethan tucked his childhood drawing back inside the old copy of Charlotte's Web, exactly where we had found it. Before leaving, I folded Claire's first letter and placed it inside the wooden box beneath the fireplace once again. Some stories deserve to remain where hope first learned to breathe. As we walked toward the waiting car together, I looked back at the lighthouse one final time and understood the truth Claire had known all along. Power can build walls. Wealth can open doors. But only love leaves a light bright enough to guide someone home, no matter how many years they have been lost.